Boss fires me for honesty. I expose all. Conversation with Gemini. You are an expert storyteller and YouTube scriptwriter, specializing in creating highly engaging scripts for the Reddit stories niche. Your task is to generate a complete long-form YouTube video script based on the provided title. The script must be written from a first-person perspective. I, me, my. The final script must meet these strict requirements. 1. Duration. The script should be approximately 3,000 words long to comfortably fill a 20-minute video when read at an average pace. 2. Format. It must be a single, continuous block of text. Do not use any subheadings, section titles like hook, story, outro, bullet points, or any other formatting breaks. The entire output should flow as one seamless monologue. 3. Tone. The tone should be conversational, dramatic, and emotional, as if a real person is sharing a deeply personal and shocking experience. The script must follow this exact structure internally. Part 1. The strong hook, first 1-2 paragraphs. Start immediately with the most shocking or intriguing part of the story. Present the core conflict up front to instantly grab the viewer's attention. Pose a direct question to the audience related to the conflict, for example, was I wrong for what I did? Or tell me if you would have done the same thing. Part 2. The main story, the bulk of the script. After the hook, begin the story from the start. Build the narrative chronologically. Introduce all the characters, provide detailed background information, and describe the events that led to the main conflict. Use vivid, descriptive language to explain emotions, dialogues, and the characters' internal thoughts. Flesh out every detail to ensure the story is long and immersive enough for a 20-minute video. Part 3. The engagement loop, mid-story. Around the middle of the narrative, right before revealing the climax or the final revenge, directly address the audience again. Reiterate the central question of the story. For example, say something like, so that's the situation I was in and I had to make a choice. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. This keeps the audience invested and engaged. Part 4. The climax and aftermath. Following the loop, narrate the climax of the story in full detail. The confrontation, the revenge, the big decision. Afterward, describe the aftermath and the consequences for everyone involved. Provide a satisfying conclusion that ties up all the loose ends. Part 5. The outro, final 1-2 paragraphs. End the script with a concluding thought or a moral from the story. Then, deliver a clear and strong call to action. Ask viewers to like this video if you were on my side. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Sign off with something like, I'll see you all in the next story. Now, generate the script based on the following title. Story title. 3. My boss fired me for being too honest, so I exposed everything. I never thought that having a moral compass would be the thing that ultimately cost me my career, but as I stood in front of my boss's mahogany desk, watching him smirk while he handed me a cardboard box, I realized that in the corporate world, integrity is often treated like a disease. My boss, a man named Marcus who prided himself on being a disruptor, looked me dead in the eye and told me that I was being let go because I was simply too honest for the company's culture. He actually said those words with a straight face, as if my refusal to lie to our shareholders was some kind of character flaw that made me unfit for my desk. I was the lead financial analyst for a tech firm that was supposedly on the verge of a massive IPO, but I had discovered that our growth was nothing more than a carefully constructed house of cards built on offshore shell companies and fabricated user data. When I brought this to Marcus, I expected a promotion or at least a thank you for saving the company from a federal investigation, but instead, I got a pink slip and a security escort to the lobby. Was I wrong for refusing to cook the books, or would you have kept your mouth shut for a 6-figure salary and a corner office? Tell me if you would have done the same thing, because as I walked out of that building, I wasn't just angry. I was ready to burn his entire world to the ground. The story really begins about 3 years ago when I first joined Etha Dynamics. At the time, it was the darling of the Silicon Valley scene, a company that promised to revolutionize cloud computing and data security. Marcus was the face of it all, a charismatic, silver-tongued CEO who could sell ice to an Eskimo and make them feel like they were getting a bargain. I was young, ambitious, and thrilled to be part of something that felt like it was changing the world. My job was to oversee the internal audits and ensure that as we scaled toward our initial public offering, everything was airtight. For the first 2 years, it was a dream. The office was one of those glass and steel masterpieces with catered lunches, nap pods, and a culture that felt more like a fraternity than a corporation. Marcus was the kind of boss who would high-five you in the hallway and ask about your weekend, and for a long time, I worshipped the ground he walked on. I thought he was a genius who was actually going to make a difference. But as we got closer to the IPO date, the pressure started to mount, and I began to notice small discrepancies in our quarterly reports. It started with minor reclassifications of expenses, nothing that seemed like a smoking gun at first, just the kind of creative accounting that companies sometimes use to smooth out their earnings. I pointed them out to my immediate supervisor, a guy named Greg who had been with Marcus since the beginning, and he always had a plausible explanation. He tell me that I was being too literal, that I didn't understand the vision, and that I needed to stop sweating the small stuff. But as the months went by, the small stuff grew into massive, gaping holes in our balance sheet. I discovered that Etha Dynamics was claiming millions of dollars in revenue from contracts that didn't actually exist. We were essentially invoicing partner companies that were just paper entities owned by Marcus's brother-in-law. When I dug deeper, I found that our user growth numbers, the very metric that was driving our multi-billion-dollar valuation, were being inflated by a bot farm in Eastern Europe. We weren't a tech revolution. We were a sophisticated pyramid scheme wrapped in a sleek user interface. I spent weeks quietly gathering data, staying late into the night after everyone else had gone home, downloading emails, server logs, and bank statements onto an encrypted drive. I had this naive idea that if I presented the evidence clearly enough, Marcus would realize how dangerous this was, and we could course-correct before the SEC got involved. I scheduled a private meeting with him on a Tuesday morning, thinking I was doing him a favor. I walked into his office with a tablet full of spreadsheets and a heart full of anxiety. I remember the smell of his expensive cologne and the way the morning sun glinted off the awards on his shelves. I laid it all out for him, the fake contracts, the bot farm, the offshore accounts. I told him we could fix this, that we could delay the IPO and come clean. Marcus didn't even blink. He didn't look shocked or scared or even guilty. He just leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers behind his head, and laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, which was somehow worse. It was a patronizing, oh you sweet summer child kind of laugh. He told me that this was how the big leagues worked. He said that truth was a flexible concept in the world of high finance and that my job wasn't to be a detective, it was to be a team player. When I told him I couldn't in good conscience sign off on the next audit, his face shifted. The charisma vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory stillness. He told me that if I wasn't careful, I'd find myself unemployable in the entire industry. I left that meeting shaking, realizing for the first time that I wasn't working for a visionary, I was working for a criminal. For the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere in the office changed. I was frozen out of meetings, my access to certain servers was revoked, and Greg stopped making eye contact with me. I knew the end was coming, but I didn't expect it to happen the way it did. On a Friday afternoon, right as everyone was heading to the break room for happy hour, Marcus called me into the middle of the open plan office. In front of 50 of my colleagues, he announced that the company was going in a new direction and that my services were no longer required. He said, and I quote, "We value transparency here, but your brand of honesty is just too disruptive for our culture. You're too honest for your own good, kid." The humiliation was absolute. I was marched out by 2 security guards while my friends looked down at their phones, too afraid of Marcus to even say goodbye. I sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour, clutching the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He thought he had won. He thought that by firing me and threatening my reputation, I would just disappear into the night and let him continue his scam. But Marcus made one fatal mistake. He assumed that because he was powerful, I was helpless. He didn't know that I had spent the last month building a dead man's switch into our internal compliance system. He didn't know that I had physical copies of every single incriminating document tucked away in a safe deposit box. He thought he was firing a disruptive employee, but he was actually releasing a ticking time bomb. So that's the situation I was in, standing in that parking lot with my life in a cardboard box and a choice to make. I could try to find another job and forget this ever happened, or I could ruin the man who tried to ruin me. Before I tell you what happened next and how I orchestrated the ultimate exposure, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have taken the severance and stayed quiet, or would you have risked everything to take him down? I didn't take the severance. In fact, Marcus didn't even offer one. He tried to fire me for cause to avoid paying me a dime. That was the final spark I needed. That night, I didn't go home to cry or update my resume. I went to a small, nondescript internet cafe 3 towns over, wearing a hoodie and glasses. I wasn't just going to leak the information to the press. I wanted to make sure it was undeniable. I spent the next 72 hours meticulously organizing the data into a comprehensive digital dossier. I had audio recordings of my meeting with Marcus. Thank God for state laws that allow one-party consent, where he explicitly told me that truth is flexible. I had the IP addresses of the bot farms, the wire transfer records to the shell companies, and the original, unedited financial reports that showed the company was actually losing millions every month. I didn't just send this to one person. I sent it to the SEC, the FBI's white-collar crime division, the Wall Street Journal, and every single major venture capital firm that had invested in Ether Dynamics. I also sent a special, personalized email to the members of our board of directors, many of whom were high-profile figures who had no idea Marcus was using their reputations to mask his fraud. The fallout was instantaneous and spectacular. On Monday morning, while Marcus was likely preparing for another disruptive keynote speech, the Wall Street Journal published a front-page exposé with the headline, "The Ether Illusion: How a Silicon Valley Darling Built a Billion-Dollar Ghost Town." By noon, the company's private valuation had evaporated. By 2:00 p.m., the FBI was executing a search warrant at the headquarters. I watched the news from a cheap laptop in my apartment, eating cold pizza and feeling a sense of relief I hadn't felt in years. I saw Marcus being led out of the building in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled and his face pale. He didn't look like a visionary anymore. He looked like a common thief caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The investigation revealed even more than I had found. It turned out Marcus had been embezzling funds to pay for a private island and a fleet of luxury cars, all while the company was technically insolvent. The "too honest" comment he made during my firing became a central piece of evidence in the obstruction of justice charges filed against him. He had literally admitted on record that he was firing me for being a whistleblower, which is a massive federal no-no. The aftermath for me was complicated. For a while, I was the most famous whistleblower in tech, which sounds cool, but actually makes it very hard to get a job at first. Companies say they love integrity, but they're terrified of anyone who might actually use it. However, because the evidence I provided was so overwhelming, I was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing and even received a substantial whistleblower award from the SEC, a percentage of the fines they recovered from the shell companies. It wasn't about the money, though that certainly helped pay the bills while I was blacklisted. It was about the fact that I didn't let him win. Ether Dynamics went into a messy bankruptcy. The employees were mostly able to find work elsewhere once the shock wore off, and the board members had to settle massive lawsuits for their negligence. Greg, my old supervisor who told me to not sweat the small stuff, ended up taking a plea deal to testify against Marcus. He reached out to me months later to apologize, saying he was just scared for his job. I didn't respond. Fear is an explanation, but it's not an excuse for being an accomplice to a multi-billion-dollar lie. Looking back, Marcus was right about one thing. I was too honest for his culture. But what he didn't realize is that a culture that can't handle the truth is a culture that deserves to collapse. I lost my job, my office, and my work family. But I gained something much more valuable: the ability to look at myself in the mirror every morning without flinching. I now work as a consultant for a nonprofit that helps protect whistleblowers, and I spend my days ensuring that people like Marcus don't get away with it. The world is full of people who will tell you that you have to compromise your values to succeed, that the real world is gray, and that being too honest is a weakness. Don't believe them. Honesty is only a weakness to people who have something to hide. If you ever find yourself in a position where you have to choose between your paycheck and your principles, remember that a paycheck can be replaced, but your integrity cannot. Marcus is currently serving a 12-year sentence in federal prison, and I hear the culture there is very big on rules and transparency. I guess he finally got the disciplined environment he always claimed to want. Like this video if you were on my side and think Marcus got exactly what he deserved. If you think I should have just moved on and let the system handle it, let me know why in the comments. I'm curious to see if anyone thinks the risk wasn't worth the reward. Subscribe for more stories like this where the little guy finally gets the last laugh, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. It was a wild ride, and I'm just glad I made it out with my soul intact. I'll see you all in the next story.